Hey everyone, Greg Mescall here with you. Thanks for joining us on USA Water Polo Facebook Live. Following up on news shared earlier this morning, USA Water Polo's Racial Equity and Reform Task Force, which is co-chaired by two of our guests today, Brenda Villa and John Abdou, announcing 9 appointees from all over the water polo community around the U.S. And we wanted to talk with a few of the folks added to the task force today that will also join us today, Clarke, Weatherspoon, and Chelsea Johnson. We appreciate all four taking time. If you're watching live on Facebook and you have questions, comments, thoughts, feel free to add them in, and we'll try and relay them here to our group. And as a reminder, this is just the first of what we plan on being many public conversations around the efforts of this task force and kind of sharing updates on what they're working on and what's coming down the road. So as we alluded to, just the early stages here, but we think important to kind of share what this group is working on and what they have in store. And so let's see, maybe John, I'll kick it over to you for a minute, John. Maybe you can kind of just jump in a bit on some of those thoughts, and we'll see if we can get Brenda back here.
Yeah, no worries, Greg. Thanks for putting this together and having us all here. And yeah, I'll speak for Brenda as she's making her way back here. But yeah, Brenda is a coach now, but she's also she's the GOAT, right? She's greatest of all time there on the women's side, and I think having her lead the way for us here in this sense is really inspirational, and also I think really functional for the group that we've put together. Meaning that this group that we have, this task force that along with Brenda and I are all people who have understood and experienced this intersection of race and water polo in our sport, right? And so we've all kind of known each other for a long time. Not all of us, I should say, right? But many of us have known each other for a long time in the back channels of water polo, and have always understood and respected this space that intersects our experiences, right, in the sport. And I think one thing that we are all excited about and passionate about is that we share that common goal and that common vision of how do we make change, and how do we make things better. And so the team, as it was formed, is a combination of people who raised their hand and we're really excited to be a part of this, and also people who were called upon, right, and said we really think you should be a part of this. And I think it represents our country geographically speaking. We have people, there's a broad breadth of people across the country. There's a lot of different roles, right? We got referees, we got coaches, we got parents, right? You have administrators, you have all athletes. So you're kind of cutting it from all angles, which I think is important too. And then I think the last thing I'll say, looks like Brenda's back here, is that the two people that we have on the call today, or on this Facebook Live today, and Clarke and Chelsea, these are people who I believe would have raised their hands, but I didn't give them a chance to raise their hand to do so before I could call them and say you need to be a part of this, right? So they didn't get the luxury of like the delay of like, all right, I'm raising my hand and I want to do this, which I believe and I know in my heart they would have. But these are two of the more talented people that we have in our sport outside of just water polo, right? And I think they bring unique skill sets in here that really speak to this intersection. I'll let them speak for themselves, but I couldn't be more excited to have them with us, because they're doing the work on a daily basis already, right? And then water polo happens to be part of what they do, right? And I'll say this for myself as we lead these efforts. Water polo was what I do, but it's not who I am, right? And so who we are as people, water polo is part of that, and this is where we kind of come together in this space. But
yeah, and I mean, I don't need to add anything more than what John added, but it's great to have Clarke and Chelsea a part of this team. And there's been many conversations that Clarke and I have had outside of the water polo world about this work. So I'm excited for everyone to tap into that knowledge that he holds.
If you want to get a good sense of all the appointees, please head over to usawwaterpolo.org. There's a full release, or if you're on our social media pages, you can see a full graphic, shows everyone what they do, where they're from. I'm going to start now with the two members of the task force that were added today of the 9. Chelsea, I just want to start with you. I think the diehard water polo fan knows you from Princeton, right? They obviously maybe know that you have a sister that plays water polo at a high level as well, and Ashley. But tell us about your water polo experience and how, as John alluded to, how that intersected with you wanting to be a part of this task force.
Okay, so hi everyone. I'm Chelsea. Growing up in the water polo community, my family and I were often the only African-American people that we saw on the pool deck in any capacity, whether it be a coach, a referee, or an athlete. And that always struck us and struck me especially as odd, because you see these sports like football and basketball that are dominated by people of color, right? And they're so good. And it's just the fact that this is a water sport and this is a sport that's not readily available to people of color, I would say, in many communities, that made it inaccessible. And so I am excited to be a part of this task force because I want to see more people of color on the pool deck, right? I want more people of color to be comfortable joining a sport like water polo and not being afraid to be the only person that looks like them, right? And not being the only person that looks like them. I hope that this task force can make some change and start to open the gates, like open water polo to our community, right? And make it a community that is welcome in water polo and also that you see regularly in water polo. I know I get so excited when I see other people of color playing. Like there are 2 African-American boys on the men's team at Princeton, and I was so excited when I saw that they had been recruited. It's just, so it's little things like that that make people in this community want to play, is just representation, right? And I am so glad to see Clarke as an African-American coach in water polo, because I haven't seen many, right?
And Chelsea, just to kind of go off that a bit, what else have you gotten involved in post collegiate water polo that has you wanting to lend some of your expertise to this task force?
So currently I am in law school. I'm entering my 2nd year of law school, and I'm doing a social justice concentration with a public interest on the side. So I'm focusing on elevating at-risk or underserved communities in the US, I hope, but starting in Florida, because that's where I think I'm gonna start practicing, and helping them to be on a higher level than they currently are in the legal system, right? So I want to help these people that have not always been able to access their rights, to be able to get to that point where you don't have to be requesting your rights, you don't have to be wondering what your rights are, that you know what your rights are and know that there are people that are helping you, right? That our system has not been favorable to people of color for all of my life and all of our history, right? And I'm hoping to be able to be a part of that change. And so that also has been a driving force for me in my career goals and in my why I'm joining this task force.
And now let's turn to Clarke Weatherspoon. Clarke, just tell us a bit similar to Chelsea about your water polo experience, and then what it is that made you want to get involved with this group.
Yeah, thanks, Greg, for having me, John and Brenda. Thanks for inviting me. It's great to partner with all of you. For me, like, water polo is my first love. I was into swimming as a kid. I started competitive swimming at like 5, and I was always the kid in swim practice who was going to the bottom. I was, hanging on the wall too long. I was pulling on the lane lines. I was grabbing other kids' ankles. And, as soon as I saw water polo, I realized it was a perfect opportunity to be social, to be in the water. And my high school coach was actually the parent of one of my good friends. So I actually got to start playing water polo as kind of a young kid in an area. I grew up in New Hampshire, and there was no youth water polo there. There was just high school water polo in the private school that I was going to for high school. My dad worked there as well. So I got to play with high school kids as like a middle schooler, which was really fun. And then I went to Santa Barbara. I played Santa Barbara for 2 years, and just the experience of coming to California. I don't think I was really, as a player, I don't think I was really ready to make that jump in terms of understanding how intense water polo training was as an athlete, but my love of the game was just so deep, so I played for 2 years. I did a study abroad, and I came back from my study abroad and I started coaching at the Santa Barbara Water Polo Club right away. And that actually was a huge career moment for me, because I was thinking of becoming a professor. And And I decided to become a high school teacher because I wanted to coach water polo. I realized that if I went to graduate school and got a PhD and, kind of went down the professor road, the opportunity to coach club water polo or to coach high school water polo just wouldn't have been there for me. So it was at a core level that I made some career choices, and those choices really revolved around water polo. And from there, I coached at the Marin Water Polo Club for several years, and then was the head coach at the Stanford Water Polo Club for a long time. And water polo for me is really important. It's not who I am, but I think about some of the most meaningful relationships that I have. They're built around water polo. Some of my most significant experiences around race, around cross-racial solidarity have been around water polo. I think about sitting down with friends of mine of different races and having serious conversations and working through problems. A lot of those have happened on the pool deck, or they've been with friends that I've met through water polo, people that I've been able to call and say, hey, I'm having this, situation, or someone's been able to call me and say, hey, there's a kid on my team who needs help, can you talk to them? So for me, water polo is a really important community to be a part of. I also am doing this because I really believe in the water polo community. When John called me, it wasn't a demand, it was a request. And I said yes, because I believe in the people that play the sport. I feel like when I walk on the pool deck, I feel like I'm at home, and I feel like I get a chance to be connected with people that share values that I have, that believe in hard work, that believe in community building, that believe in extending a hand to people that you don't know. That's been my experience of water polo. Yeah, there have been times where like negative things have happened, and that's also why I'm here, to be able to, kind of help folks. But actually, I think one of the cool things about this opportunity is that people actually want to do the work. There's a lot of people that I've talked to that really believe that USA Water Polo as an organization and the community that's a part of it is actually really committed to doing this, and that's exciting. There's some communities that aren't, and I think this one is. And so, yeah. And then just professionally, like I said, I'm an educator. I've been I was a high school teacher for the better part of 17, 18 years. I also was a dean. I'm now a head of a middle school in San Francisco. I also was a dean of equity and inclusion. So I was doing work with folks around how to build a multicultural community, right? And building multicultural communities is it's difficult. It's not comfortable, and it's something that, I think we take for granted. But if you look at the history of our country, a lot of people don't have experience of building multicultural communities. It was illegal for people of different races to get married. It was illegal for people in certain neighborhoods to sell their homes to people of different races. It was illegal for people of different races to go to school together. I talked to my parents, I talked to my grandparents, and they didn't have experiences of going to interracial schools. So it's important, I think, to be thinking about like what are the actual challenges. That's a cute little puppy right there. It's like, what are the challenges that as an organization we need to face, and what are the things as a society that we can be more honest about, and give people a little more grace to be able to make mistakes so that they can build together. So the opportunity to do this work is really exciting. If Brenda is doing something and she's the leader, I want to get involved. So just a really kind of quick story about Brenda, which I think is really important. So Brenda and I have been doing very similar work in different institutions over the last couple of years, and nobody knows that Brenda is the GOAT because she's just another teacher. People meet her at a conference, and every time I see Brenda at a conference, at her meeting, I give her a big hug, and I'm like, oh, do you know that Brenda's a world champion? She's player of the decade. And people are like, oh, wow, okay, water polo. It's a really great opportunity to be partnered with her, to be able to be led by her, and I'm super excited to be a part of this team. So if I have to come off to the bench, if I have to take stats, if I got to carry the caps, I'm willing to do that. So I'm excited to be a part of the squad.
That's excellent, Clarke. I appreciate you sharing that story, and everyone should do that with Brenda. I know I take great joy in reminding people about all of her accolades, even though she tries to be humble. it's hard when you've won as many things as she has to not bring it up. Clarke, you hit on something interesting. You said the phrase a couple of times about doing this work, and I think in this moment, a lot of people, and I'm referring to the last 2 months, right, where there's really been this kind of awakening of addressing a lot of important issues that have gone neglected for a long time. And there's been a feeling, well, we should try and say the right things and then say some more right things, but what about the actual doing of things? And so I come back to John and Brenda, when you get this task force together, part of the intention, right, is to make it about more than just words and to tangibly change the sport for the better. John, I'll start with you. In your mind, I know there are kind of 4 bullet points that the task force was looking at initially. What does doing that work look like for the task force?
It means relying heavily on the 2 folk you just heard from right now, right? It's Ken, I mean, for people out there who haven't met Clarke or Chelsea, or heard them speak about this kind of stuff, hopefully you just get a sense after hearing them talk of why they're part of this work with us, right? So we could talk about the work, but before you can begin to work, you got to have the right people on the bus, right? And so you got to get the right people on board. You got to assemble the right team, and the work is yeah. I mean, there's multiple layers involved in this in the work, but it's not a easy lift. It's going to be a decent amount of work for all of us, and because there's a good group of us, and we're going to have a lot of support outside of this group. I think it's important to mention that as well, right? Like the nine of us plus Brenda and I, right? The 11 of us that are going to be doing this. We're going to craft the work that needs to be done. But to Clarke's point, I think he said something about the community of water polo being really behind this. I believe that to be true as well. I can't tell you how many emails and direct messages, whatever it is that I got over the last, Brenda and I both got over the last, few weeks of just people who are fired up to be a part of this and help. So I don't want people, everybody out who's listening or watching this right now, to think that this is about us, that this is about all of us, right? And so you're going to be involved in the work, right? So as we define what the work is, it is going to be delegated out and parceled amongst all the people in our community, and then they're all going to have to work there. Whether that you're a club administrator, a club coach, how are you doing that work within your club? If you're a high school coach or a college coach, how are you doing that within your college or your high school? If you're a parent, right, and you're part of a parent group, what are you guys doing within your parent group to make things better? So within the referees, how are the referees doing this? How are the coaches doing this? Every person within their every group of people in relation to our sport is going to have to pick up the slack and work on this. We do have those four goals, but we're not, I think, limited to those. Those are guiding principles where we want to first tackle the policies and procedures. Where I know Chelsea's law background and work in law school right now is going to be helpful. We're going to have to really take a hard look at our policies and procedures and having a zero tolerance policy and an enforcement of that policy. We're going to and the mechanisms for reporting incidences of discrimination and hate that people experience in our sport. I think we want to build on educational resources. So having the head of a middle school and someone who has the educational experience like Clarke is going to be really important in that piece. Like, how are we building educational materials? What are we using to educate people out there? How are we best reaching those people, right? Like, you can't just lecture everybody, right? We're gonna have to create like fun educational materials for younger kids to make access to this kind of stuff. We're gonna have to be able to talk to parents in a different space. So creating those educational materials. And then I think the long-term goal of this is creating more access for the support for the sport. And that's gonna be lifelong work for all of us, right? And that's not going to happen overnight. Non-traditional sports in America have now become almost 100% privatized, right? So if you privatize access to sport, then access to that sport is going to be very limited. And that's not just a water polo problem. That's an access problem across all non-traditional sports. And so I've been speaking to a lot of other NGBs and other people in the space, and that's going to take some time. But if we all put in that effort and try to change the structures and the systems that have created that limited access, then we're going to see some progress there in the short term and the long term.
Yeah, you done a lot of good stuff, and John hit on kind of the four initial bullet points or so. Those are also available at USAWaterpolo.org if anyone's curious. But as he alluded to, that's just kind of a starting point, right? There's a lot more to get into beyond that, and also to his point about helping, right, to pull off, as you alluded to, a heavy lift like this, right? It's more than just 11 people, right? It's going to be a lot of people. I kind of come back to Brenda. We were joking about your water polo accomplishments, but a useful thing you've done has been a part of some of the most successful teams in the last 20 years. And you know what it is to have everyone kind of rowing in the same direction. So when you think about trying to pull together 11 people on a task force and then get others to try and go in the right direction, what are some of the essential things to kind of get everyone on the same page to achieve this very large goal?
I mean, one thing that comes to mind is shared leadership. And I think that's something that I learned later in my career. And it'll be important here. We all have roles to play, lanes to be in, so to say, and trusting each other that we can stay in our lane and contribute to this work. But I think, like John was saying, like everyone was saying, it's work that needs to happen. We need to bring in partners. We need to collaborate. So these are all things that will be important as we move this forward. And it's also, we know that we might have some blind spots, and we're open for people to work with us, right? No one's an expert, I don't think, in this field, right? I say that because I think there's always something to learn. So I put that out there because we don't want it to be like it's this way and this is the only way. It's like, no, how are we going to make this happen is by be open to ideas and working together. And I really just want to bring in that shared leadership model, because with all of us working under the guiding principles, I think we can start going into the direction we all want USA Water Polo to be.
Chelsea, you talked a bit about your coming of age in water polo, right, and being the only African American family you'd see on the pool deck. As you hear John and Brennan talk about some of the initial initiatives of this task force, does one of those resonate with you more than another? As you were thinking about getting involved in this, was there a specific area that you felt like this is where I want to make a dent as far as improving things?
I wouldn't say one specifically resonated with me, but I do think that a really important part of what we can get done is the accessibility aspect, allowing like water safety primarily, and then water sports and water polo to be accessible to younger African American and minority children, right? Because when you start water polo in Florida, at least, it's usually around age 12. And that's when a lot of African American kids are just learning to swim if they do have the opportunity to do so. And so I think that swim lessons and other stuff like that, like going into the community and starting at a base level for these communities that haven't had access to aquatics through like historically, I think is a part that I'm really, really excited to see how we impact that. And also the policy aspect. Obviously, I love looking at rules and the law and the way that policy impacts and moves and changes actual things. I love how it translates, and so I'm excited about that part as well.
Clarke, you talked about earlier, and I thought it was great, about how some of the most kind of powerful conversations you've had on the intersection of race have come on a pool deck or have been involved in water polo. And we're talking about a sport that we all know is primarily Caucasian, right? So to get it to move forward is going to require the help of other people of different colors, right? It's gonna require everyone to kind of be pulling in the same direction. What are some of the things you've gleaned from those conversations you've had that maybe will help in this effort?
Yeah, for me, I think that the biggest one is that there's a lot of white people that play water polo that are really committed to this work and are setting like great examples for their athletes and for their teammates. I can think of one situation that happened, a couple of years ago. A team I was coaching had an incident with another team. I went to the other team's coach, who is a white coach that I really respect. And I told him what happened, and he listened to me, and he took me through the process that he went through with that athlete. I was so impressed with the level that he brought, the level of thought, the level of concern, the level of education, the level of like responsibility and care, so he didn't, like drop a hammer on this kid and say, hey, you're bad. He really took the time to educate this person about what it means to do that on an individual level, but then also what it means as a part of a team and the reflection that it has on the other kids you're playing with in the water, the reflection it has on the parents who are sitting in the stands, the reflection that it has on the whole club. And I think for our athletes to get that level of mentoring on a consistent basis from their coaches is really important. To be able to give coaches the tools to be able to do that, because I've also talked to coaches where they've said, I've seen things happen, or I heard that something happened, but I just wasn't sure what to say. So I did something, but I didn't really feel good about the thing that I did, but I knew it was wrong. And so for us as an organization to be able to empower coaches, to be able to have difficult conversations with their athletes, to be able to give athletes the skills to be able to have difficult conversations with their peers, to be able to say, hey, I heard you say that, or I saw this, and that's just not how we as a team want to behave. Because I know many of our clubs and teams and coaches have the highest standards of behavior in terms of participation, in terms of traveling, in terms of being able to just be a part of the club. There's a lot of things in many of our clubs that if you get involved in, coaches are not willing to have you around. And so for us, it's so important just to be able to empower those coaches and to be able to help coaches be able to know that they're not the only person that's having those kind of conversations with their kids of any race. To be able to help coaches get the tools to be able to have conversations when they do wrong things in the realm of, gender identity or sexual orientation. There's a whole, or social class, there's so many elements of this work where coaches are speaking to athletes and they're also talking to parents, right? Because as you know, as the coach goes, very often, so do the parents, and if the coaches are standing up and saying, hey, this is what it is we believe in, parents go with it. And I could give you a long list of coaches and clubs that are super committed to this and who feel like it's their job to be able to do this. Something that I think is really important is that many coaches grew up in an era of sports where the highest level of integrity is about respecting your teammates. It's like the highest mark of being a good sportsman. There was a Boston Globe article that I got passed by one of my colleagues that was written by Bob Cousy, and it was about his relationship with Bill Russell playing with the Celtics in the 50s and 60s, right? I want to say, I'm getting the dates wrong. Please excuse me if you're a Celtics fan out there. I apologize. But it was a letter that Bob Cousy wrote, and he was talking about his relationship with Bill Russell and how at the time he did not give Bill Russell the support that Bill Russell needed as a teammate. And as an older man, he looks back at that and he regrets that, right? I think a lot of our coaches now, coaching in the 2000s as opposed to the 1950s and 60s, have seen models of cross-racial, of cross-gender, identity, relationships that really work. And they want to be held to the highest standard. And so for us as an organization to be able to empower coaches and empower athletes to live that out, and to be able to also test that out, so to be able to go to a conference or sit on a Zoom call with a bunch of coaches and share questions and share challenges is something that I think as an organization we want to do. So they're not ad hoc conversations where someone just happens to see me on the pool deck and they say, oh, hey, I know Clarke does this professionally, or I know Brenda does this, or I know, Chelsea's in law school, so I'm just going to go ask them real quick. But it's something that as an organization we're providing as a key part of our coaches' education. I think it'll help our kids. I think it'll also make people much more interested in and much more excited about expanding the outreach. When they have more skills, when they have more tools, they'll be much more able to go to different communities and say, hey, this is water polo, this is when practices, this is our pool, come and hang out. Everyone's really excited to see you because the coaches we have, the clubs we have are great. People are, by and large, have open arms and are super excited about getting involved with people from different cultures.
That's awesome stuff. And, it's making me think about, you were hitting a bit on almost the way really successful teams connect. And John, I was thinking about you coach a number of years and you've been around teams, the very best teams, water polo or otherwise, connected on a much deeper level than just their sport, right? The way that they understood each other and cared for each other. And it almost sounds like at least one of the many ways for success in all of this is to kind of tap into that same philosophy. Like if you can really connect the coach with the players, the players with each other, and then have it extend to these important issues that we're talking about, it can really help, to Clarke's point, create that welcoming, inclusive environment for everyone.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And he's absolutely right. And it's about building community, and why a lot of diversity, quote unquote, diversity efforts fail, right? Is they fail to build within the community. They fail to do what Clarke was just describing, is empowering, but with the education and the empowerment of those community members, that will lead to the work. But if you put the work before the education, the empowerment, and the inclusion, right, then it's going to fail, right? I mean, you've seen this across the board, right? So it's not enough for a company to say, we are now going to have diverse hiring practices, and then those people that they hire, diverse candidates they hire, come into the workplace, and that workplace is not ready to be inclusive and to have those people be involved or feel comfortable or, be engaged or excited about the work that they're all going to do together. It doesn't work that way. That initiative will fail. It's not enough for a water polo club, I'll bring it to aquatics, to say we have a scholarship that we give to an athlete from a lower socioeconomic class, and then that athlete comes into that club and doesn't feel welcome and doesn't feel like they can be a part of what they're doing. And if that community is not empowered and ready and excited about the work, and frankly educated, like Clarke's saying, right, have the tools to be ready to receive that athlete, then you wasted a scholarship, because that athlete will now leave. So a lot of times you'll hear about this work being done, but it's not often successful. And so when I get fired up listening to Clarke talk right now, it's because he's putting faith in, and he's communicating our faith in that our community is ready to embrace the work. Because if they're not, then a lot of the stuff we try to do is going to fall to the wayside, right? So we need people to be ready to be to embrace all of this, right, and to be ready to be a part of it. Yeah.
So just to build on that, I think what is like so important is that we have to be able to take criticism, right? So for me as a coach, one of the great things about coaching at Stanford was just how diverse it was. So there were kids who were like first generation Americans, kids who were immigrants, kids from all over the Bay Area would come to that club. Parents spoke a lot of different languages. People practiced a lot of different religions. And there were always moments where people said and did things that were always kind of like, oh, okay, like, I'm not sure, like, that's how you say that, or like, but the ability that people had there to be able to say, actually, I don't want to be called that. I want to be called this. Or like, this is how you pronounce my name. Or like, this is the reason that I'm not at practice. This is the holiday that I'm practicing. And to have other kids on the team be willing to take that correction, to have kids on the team be willing, for instance, to not change their name to an Americanized name, but to use the name that they were given, and have everyone on the team actually properly pronounce that name. It's like really, really, really important. And giving the parents, the ability to say, hey, listen, if you can't have your kid here because of X reason or Y reason, we totally support you, right? And so I think being able to take that feedback from your families or from your athletes or from your co-coaches. We had a coaching staff for a couple of years where, there was an Indian dude, a black dude, there was a Jewish dude, there was a Ukrainian guy, there was a Serbian guy, there was an Italian dude. I mean, like, we had so many things going on there, and the opportunities to make mistakes were many, but the opportunities to learn were many. And I think if we bring those two things together, people can be really excited about that work.
That idea of learning, I think, is huge. And, Clarke, you work in schools. John, you were a teacher. Chelsea, you are a student. Brenda, you're working in schools. Brenda, I'll come back to you. I think a lot of people might watch this and think, well, I'm not on the task force. I'm waiting to hear what help they might need, but I want to do something to move the ball forward here, so to speak. Brenda, I know we've talked in the weeks leading up to this about a lot of people doing their own education, and everyone's hit on learning at some point in this, but how important is it for people to try and educate themselves from something as little as Clarke was talking about to learning how to say someone's name? Or I know you've given the example of about having parents that you had to translate for, like understanding your teammates' experience, to the bigger stuff like reading many, many books and watching interviews, that sort of stuff. Brenda, how important have you found that stuff to be, that self-education?
It's really important. And I do think it starts at home, right? Like having these conversations around your dinner table. And I know that I'm taking a lot of parenting classes because I want to make sure that I can, give my kids the skills to have these conversations when things come up and they can point it out. And I'm trying not to, say like, oh, we don't want to talk about that. It's like, no, if my daughter points something out, we're going to have this conversation. So I think it really is important. And it's important to know that people are going to start at different levels, and that's okay. But you need to know where your own level is, and you need to be comfortable with that. And like Clarke said, like, we're going to make mistakes. And just because one comment or one statement that you make may appear racist, right, doesn't mean that you have to stay in that moment forever. Right, you can learn from it. So that's something that for my own self-education in this, right, is like, okay, in my Latinx community, there is colorism, there's all these things that I've learned, and I may have said things growing up, but now I can recognize those and say that was wrong. And now moving forward, I can correct my own behavior and help others. So I think it really does start in your own kitchen table, and you can't be afraid to make those mistakes.
Chelsea, you are in law school right now. Right, the success for that means that you graduate law school, right? You pass the bar, you become a lawyer. You went to Princeton. Success means you get your Princeton degree. Being a part of something like this, how do you, you're a competitive person as an athlete. How do you judge what is success? What does it look like short-term, long-term?
That is a tough question. I would say short-term success, going back to Brenda's point, is like get these conversations started, right? Help people become comfortable speaking out about what's happening in their teams, what's happening in their communities, what's happening in their families, right? You have these people have these microaggressions that they say, and being able to confront those and challenge those and realize that maybe you said something in the past that was not correct, and that now you realize is not okay to say. I feel like that little change that we're making in people's minds and that you're making in yourself is a really important thing and a really good short-term measure of success. If you can help people to reevaluate the way that they think and reevaluate the way that they communicate with the people around them and empower them to have important discussions, but also all of these conversations are not huge things. Right? They can be small little things, but feeling empowered to be able to just say like, hey, I don't like that you said that, right? Or that's not an okay thing to say. Let's talk about why and a different way that you can say it, right? And then long term, I don't know what it looks like, because the task force is gonna have a lot of things to do, both little and small. Little and big, and I don't know what success will really look like, and how far in the future long term really is, and whether our goals, how quickly we can get them done, and how they'll be received by the community. I think that that's another piece we have to consider, is how what we want to get done appears to everyone else, and how accepting the water polo world will be to our mission and what we want to do.
So that's a great initial point, and I know it's a tough one to answer, right? Because there are so many things to work on. That how do you measure it, right? And there's going to be things to work on long after the task force does their thing and sets their things up. But to your initial point of a more short-term goal, I think everyone has kind of talked about this in one way or another, right? But providing those opportunities for people to feel comfortable, to have those what might feel like little throwaway conversations, but are actually really big moments in kind of making things better. This is obviously something that we could talk about for a long time. I appreciate everyone joining us here today. I kind of just want to go right back around the horn one more time for anyone's kind of final thoughts, things they'd want other people to know about this topic. If someone's watching that is involved in your community of water polo where you're at, or just anything else do you think is worth people knowing as this work gets underway, and knowing that there's a lot more to come too. And Clarke, I'll kind of start with you if there's anything else you want to add on this topic.
Yeah, Brenda touched on this idea that no one's an expert, and for me, I think embracing the common dignity that that we all have and we all demand is really important. For me, I think I was the first or one of the only Black people to play water polo at Santa Barbara. I remember I walked on the pool deck, and Joe O'Brien, Gaucho Joe, the original Gaucho, was the coach. And I remember, like, when I was talking to him, I never mentioned my race, right? So I walked on deck. I was like, "Hey, I'm Clarke. I'm here for water polo." And he was like, "Oh, okay. All right." And like, Joe was shocked that I was a Black person. And like 2 seconds later, the level of care, the level of respect, the level of dignity that I felt from Joe and still continue to feel 20 years later is so strong and is so evident. I don't know what it is Joe knows about, like Black history or Black politics or whatever, but the level of like respect and dignity that he showed to me as a player, as a former player, as a coach, as a human being, the respect that he showed my mom when she came to visit me, those are things like my mom actually still talks about that visit with me that she had my first year of college as something that she really felt like my coach cared about me. I think that if we can start with those levels of demonstrated respect, demonstrated regard, consistent care, and a desire to do more to support our athletes, our communities, and to expand the circle and to keep everyone in the circle, I think we can do a lot. If we start there, all the intellectualizing, all those things can come. There's more books than one can read in a lifetime. But I think if we start at that place and recognize that there's the responsibility that we have the moment that we join a team, the moment that we, show up at a practice, that by definition goes beyond ourselves and our comfort zone, I think we'll be in a great place. So that's my parting shot.
Excellent. John?
I'd stop the video right there if you could. I mean, that's because that's what this is all about. I mean, this has to be about love. It has to be about the common dignity. It has to be about inclusion. So we can intellectualize this all we want, and a lot of us, including myself, are quick to say, "Hey, watch this documentary, read this book. Let's all jump in this." And I made that. I'm not going to go back and say it was a grave mistake, but it was the first place I went to, right, in the movement was it was up here, right, as opposed to what is the demonstrated action, like Clarke is saying, what's the work that I could do on the ground floor to make this better for all of us. And so I'll wrap up by saying, well, this is about racial equity and reform and diversity, right? Really more important than those things is anytime, why now it's called DE&I, right? Diversity, equity, inclusion, right? Is that inclusion should be the first thing amongst all that. And I think we can, while I'm excited to do this work with the community, and we've all mentioned that we know that our community is ready for this, I know that we could, all of us, including myself, can all do a better job of making water polo more inclusive, right? We can make this a more inclusive space. We can be more welcoming to people as they come into the sport. We can be more caring for the people that are within the sport so we don't lose them, right? We could all do that inclusion work before we can start tackling all these policies, procedures, and education that because that's very little education needed to be an inclusive person, right, in our sport, right? That just takes caring, right? That's just taking caring you don't have to read a lot of books about that, right? Like, do you care about that athlete on your team that can't afford the pair of shoes that the team decided they want to buy for team shoes next week? Did you think about that athlete along the way? Did you think about when, hey, all of a sudden you wanted a new suit design, right? That athlete and that family might not be able to care for, buy another new suit when it came in. Did you think about when you were handing out your forms, did you have them in other languages that maybe people speak and don't read in English, right? Now do you have your club registration forms in Spanish and in English, right? Do you have just those little things, right? That inclusion, keeping people in, bringing people in and keeping people in. It's important because we all care about this sport a lot. It all means a lot to us, and we want to see it grow. And that's how we grow. We grow by being inclusive, and then we'll tackle equity issues, we'll tackle diversity issues, we'll tackle all those things, and we're well equipped. But I want to stress that inclusion comes before those things, and so I hope that everybody can work on those immediately if you haven't already.
Brenda?
Two things, and Clarke's story just made me think about a mentor of mine, which is John Tanner at Stanford. And I remember his visit to my parents' house, and not that many people I've invited to my parents' home in Commerce. And, I made the right decision in picking Stanford because of the way he made my family feel on that visit. So yes, Clarke, all of that. I agree. And then the last thing is, I want our water polo community to be able to bring their full self to the pool deck. And I think once we accept everyone's, authentic self, we will become inclusive. And that means just being able to share everything that you represent and not having to hide one thing or another, your SES or your race or your religious background, anything, right? Like, bring your full self to the pool deck and we'll become an inclusive. That'll help us get there. And I hope we get there sooner rather than later, but I think that's a first step.
And Chelsea?
Okay, my last thing, I just want to say that this mission that we have is like, you can see that there's a short term and there's a long term, but for right now, you don't, like everyone listening, don't be afraid to learn. I know we keep going back to the education part of it, but don't be afraid to learn and don't be afraid to listen. I know that I've had a lot of conversations surrounding race, diversity, inclusion, equity in the past weeks and couple months. And there are some people that you can see that like tense up a little bit when the conversation starts, right? That reaction is normal, but it's not necessary. And it's hard to change that mindset for some people, but I feel like that's an important step in the right direction to normalize having these conversations, right? Because this is people's lives. These are conversations that we have every day, right? All of us have had these conversations daily, but some people haven't. But I think that it's really important that everyone start to have these conversations and feel a little bit more comfortable having these conversations. And that'll be a good way to get on the road to inclusivity, just basic inclusivity, when you can realize and put yourself in these conversations and realize that this is how people live on a day-to-day basis, right? And these are the conversations that they continue to have just amongst themselves. And the ability for minority groups to have these conversations with white people and other people outside of their group will be an important way to kind of bring them in, and help them to feel more included and less isolated in a community like this.
Great. Awesome. Well, this was a great conversation. Really appreciate everyone tuning in and watch. This will also be available on USA Water Polo's YouTube page on demand after the fact. But as we alluded to at the top, just kind of getting started on this, as we announced 9 appointees today, 2 of them joining us today, Clarke Weatherspoon, Chelsea Johnson. Thanks for your time. Co-chairs for the Racial Equity and Reform Task Force, John Abdou and Brenda Villa. More to come on this topic here and at usawaterpolo.org. But thanks to these 4 for joining us, and we will be talking to you more soon.